All right, so there's a lot of talk out there about inflation and how the value of the dollar continues to go down as more time goes on, right? And so a lot of our investors are asking questions about how they can maximize and make sure that their cash is actually keeping up with inflation at a minimum and we're putting it in the right buckets. So when we think about long-term savings, most of us store our cash in some sort of bank savings account and then we deploy it out to different investments. But we still have this home base of a bank savings account to fall back on because we've been told that it's safe and it's locked in there in that account. And while that might be the case that it's this nice convenient container, the misconception is really that that is the best move or place for that, because what's happening is you are playing into the hands of inflation, meaning that the longer the cash sits in an account that has no yield or a teeny tiny yield, the less value that cash is going to have over the long term, right? So if we jump in and we look at how our cash comes into us, right? So if we have money that gets paid in from a job, our business, income, investments, whatever it might be, and as we get profits or payback on something, we stick it in a bank account. The challenge becomes with the bank as we fund in. So let's just say we're putting in, $2,000 a month into our bank account or our savings account, right? We're adding in money. What ultimately is happening is with inflation, we're lowering those dollars. We're lowering the value of the cash as we put it in because unfortunately, banks pay a terrible rate of return, something like 0.1%. You might get lucky in a CD and get more than that in some areas. But regardless, it rarely ever keeps up with inflation because inflation is happening at a rate of 1, 2, 3, or even 4%, right? So if our money is getting a small rate like this, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by putting it in a bank account where we're losing value in it. If I put $100 in a bank account in 1990, that money's not going to be worth very much when we look at 2021, right? 30 some years later. So it's important to recognize the location that it's in, as well as how we actually have the cash deployed in a policy or in an account, right? So what our investors look at is go, okay, well, if I'm just sticking it in a box, in a container right now, why don't I figure out what the best container is to keep it while I'm in and out of deals or while I'm not using it? What's the dry powder doing before I deploy it, right? So what we're going to look at is how investors are shifting the focus and saying, okay, if I'm putting in $2,000 a month away for savings, quote unquote, I don't want to stick it in a place where it is just losing value. I want to stick it in a place where it's at least staying the same or obviously going up. And by putting money into this box, there's no asset outside of the cash itself. You're not purchasing anything. There's nothing else there. It's not an asset. It's just where the cash currently sits. So what we focus on with our investors is how our policies can function as one, a storage mechanism, but two, actually provide us with real rate of return on our cash. So if we're deploying out $2,000 a month, let's figure out what that best box is. So if you look here on the screen, I'm pulling up what we call an illustration with one of our cash value life insurance policies and how investors and our long-term savers are looking at this. So the way that they actually function with this is they go, look, let's say I want to put in $24,000 per year, $2,000 per month, right? That's what I'm seeing here. So if I scroll down, I'm actually going to show you what this looks like in action. So as I begin to pay in my $24,000 a year, whether that's in lump sums, whether that is monthly, quarterly, whatever it might be, at the minimum, what I'm doing is I'm actually purchasing something. By putting it in one of these policies, I'm actually purchasing a death benefit or life insurance, right? And that's what you see in this column here. So just by shifting our focus from sitting in a bank account to putting it in this other type of account that functions like a savings account, at a minimum, I'm actually getting $1 million in death benefit coverage. And if anything ever happens to me day one or 50 years from now, my family is going to get that $1 million payout, tax-free lump sum, right? Now, in the beginning, though, what you're going to notice in this net cash value column is a negative return. So I put in 24,000 in year one. I have 18,800 showing up in cash inside that account. The reason for that is first and foremost, I'm buying $1 million worth of death benefit coverage, right? I'm purchasing an asset. It's not just sitting in a random box. So in the beginning, when people are first warming up to this concept, they go, oh, I can't stomach the negative return, right? Well, you stomach a negative return every single year that your money sits in a savings account, because all it's ever doing is going down to inflation, because you're not really getting any growth on your money. So the long-term investor who thinks about this goes, look, I need to have life insurance anyway. Why don't I combine the two, give myself inflation protection and a safety net for my family, and actually combine the efforts, right? So I'm going to shift that same $2,000. I'm not making any more. I'm not changing anything else that I'm doing. Instead of putting it in the savings account, I'm now contributing to this policy that gives me a giant death benefit coverage. And as I continue to pay in, if you look at these years as they go on, and if I specifically start to look out here, you'll notice that in between years 5 and 6, we get a positive return. And what we're actually doing is that means that the growth on our money is outpacing and now broke even. So our death benefit is satisfied and we're able to actually see significant returns as things go. So our baseline is 4% as these accounts go. That's usually the net figure when you scale out over time. And so I've paid in $24,000 a year into this policy. And look, I'm starting to see more dollars in. So I put in another $24,000 and an extra $2,000 showed up. And it goes on and on and on that way, right? And that death benefit was in place the entire time. If anything ever happened to us, that death benefit is there for our family, or if we needed it for early for like a medical expense or a chronic illness or an accident, we can actually tap in and accelerate some of those benefits. So as we scale this thing out, you'll notice I'm still paying in that same amount of money. In this case, I just did it for 15 years, right? So that's a 45-year-old. Let's look at year 70, when we're 70 years old. Just by shifting where the cash sat, still making the same contributions, I went from moving them in a bank account where that value was just always going to go down because of inflation, to at age 70, I stopped contributing at this point 10 years ago. I have put in a total of $342,000. So for 15 years left in my working career, I put in $24,000 a year, $2,000 a month. And all I did is, instead of putting it in the bank, I shifted it into this policy. And look at where the net cash value is, right? Almost doubled in value just by shifting it from the bank into this policy. It grew to $650,000, $648,000. That is when the compounding interest, that 4%, is kicked in. It's been doing its thing for now 26 years, right? So just by shifting where that cash goes, we still have the same level of liquidity and access to it. It more than doubled our money there. And the entire time, we had a little over $1 million of protection. It grows as we continue to have the plan in place, right? So you get the locked-in protection, you've covered your downside with inflation, and you're able to make sure your cash is in the right spots. And we can go on and on and on. If we look out at 80, 90 years old, the exact same thing's going to happen. The numbers are just going to get bigger, right? So at 90 years old, we put in that 342. We stopped paying years ago now. We have $1.2 million worth of cash value, right? So that thing has quadrupled in value just by making sure it was in the right warehouse, the right space. So that's how our investors are looking at inflation. This is how they're thinking about the long term of their cash, where that asset actually is, what that asset is made up of. They want to give them that protection. They want to protect their downside with inflation, and they want to get some growth along the way.